Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the United Front Football Podcast. It is a football podcast with me and Mr. Breezy. It's the international break. We don't usually do an episode in the international break because who really cares about international football unless it's the World Cup or the Euros or something like? It's just all tossing it. But what we've done is we've put the feelers out to you, the listeners, if you want to get involved in future episodes and all episodes, because obviously we always ask for your input and your questions and your takes and all that good stuff. Get involved on our Discords, go follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We should probably set up a Blue Sky at some point, like all that stuff.
Yes.
Go get involved over there, and we always ask for your input. So do get involved. But we've got a plethora of takes and questions and people asking our opinion on stuff that we don't normally talk about or stuff that we don't usually get time to touch on. So basically not Man United and West Ham stuff, which is the vast majority of our utterings.
Yeah, thank God we get a week off.
Yeah.
We don't play till Monday either, so I'm like, let me get the weekend to enjoy. Like, have a weekend misery free. It's gonna be great.
Oh yeah, but then again, we're probably going to be recording as soon as. Or actually, is it home for you?
Away from home. So.
Oh, okay. So so we'll have to record
on Monday.
Yeah. We're recording immediately after. Damn. Foiled again. So yeah, we've asked for your opinions, and we'll just go through them. So there's tons of people who have put questions in the past, people who haven't, and we appreciate all of your inputs. So we'll get to start off with Jord from, I think it was on my Discord. This. He said, "Do some players actually play better for their nation than club? If so, who and why?" I've got a few opinions on this. I don't know if you want to take us off with your take first, though.
Yeah, I kind of struggled to think of like any real obvious ones that stood out. Like I'd be lying if I said I watched any other nation regularly other than England or like during apart from international tournaments. But even then, you're getting sort of like a condensed version of said teams. It's kind of unfair to sort of form an opinion on their overall form based off that. But so the only one that really came to mind for me, which I think is a pretty obvious one, is probably Harry Maguire over the years for England. So I think there's always been two different versions of Harry Maguire, the Man United version and the England version. I think it's pretty well believed by most people that like his form for England, especially in major tournaments, has been pretty solid. Like doesn't really put a foot wrong, very reliable. Whereas you definitely couldn't say that about his Man United form over the years. And as regards to why, I think it's a pretty straightforward answer. I just think he played in the system under Southgate because it does. I mean, I'd be very surprised if he ends up getting back in to the England squad in future under Tuchel. But I mean, you never know. But I think under Southgate especially, I think he just played in a system that was much better suited to his strengths than what Man United were possibly playing when he was there. I know when. But I could be wrong on this, but I believe when Solskjaer was there and it was sort of pre-Ronaldo coming in, I vaguely remember like Luke Shaw and Maguire in particular sort of coming in for quite a bit of praise for their form at club level for once. But that was a time, from my memory anyway, that United were playing a little bit, not as high up the pitch, sitting a little bit deeper and hitting teams on the counter-attack, which if that's the game plan you're going to set up for, then Harry Maguire's a pretty good option to have in the back line for that. But I think since United's football has tried to evolve over the last couple of years, it's not really been that well suited to him because his lack of pace and the fact he turns like a tow truck gets massively exposed.
If the players in front of him, I maintain he's a top whatever percentage kind of like Premier League quality centre back. If he's going to be playing like 10 yards further deeper and he's basically just got to like defend his box, defend aerial balls in there's not many that are that much better than him in terms of actually kind of being physically dominant and getting things out in the air. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think the system suited Harry Maguire a lot. And you can actually throw another England player in there, I think, as well. Not necessarily for the style or the tactic, but just performances in Jordan Pickford. I think Pickford does well at Everton. He obviously faces a lot of, gets a lot more work to do at Everton and stuff. But for England, he's never really let England down. He's been one of the mainstays, and he's been Mr. Consistent, really, and like probably the most consistently good England goalkeeper that I can remember, other than David Seaman maybe. And even then, like my memory is hazy, and he was like 40 when he stopped playing for England. So yeah, I think you could put that in. I do have like a couple of opinions on, same as you. Sorry, like I don't really have a broad scope of like players playing better for international teams other than England players, really, and that's at tournaments. And I just think one of the reasons is I don't think international football is that very high quality, to be honest. I don't think
No.
there's many things that play into it. One of them being the kind of broken international season, not playing with each other a lot, like not having a lot of time to instill a proper kind of footballing ethos or tactic or whatever it is. It's all a lot more simple and a lot like more simple instructions, and I think that allows players to shine when, like, if they're like more of an individualist player, should we say. So players who can take a game by a scruff of the neck, they stand out a little bit more and do that kind of stuff. But I've seen on the flip side, players struggle when they're not in a really comfortable system or something that they know how to excel in. And I'd actually argue that there's more players that underperform at an international level than there are those that overperform.
I'd agree with that.
And I think Phil Foden's like a perfect example of that. Wonderful player on his day, a Premier League Player of the Year last year. He's kind of disappeared again a little bit this year, but I think he's had a few injuries. But for England, he's never really shown up. He's undoubtedly incredibly talented footballer with tons of ability, tons of actual skill and playmaking ability and ability to take charge of a game. But in terms of doing it for England, I've never seen him do it. Like, there'll be a flash here and there of his ability, but it's never really worked. And I wonder whether that is because he's literally played his entire adult career under Pep Guardiola's Man City. He's used to playing. He's
contrast.
yeah, and but also like he's just so bought into that style of play and that system and knowing his exact part in that kind of, in that system and getting the best out of him when it's not all set up for him, and he's maybe not playing in the perfect position that he wants to play in, and everything's not built around getting the best out of him. When Jude Bellingham's doing a better job than you in there, he kind of gets shown up a little bit, and it's not like he's not a kid anymore. Like, he's 24, maybe turning 25 soon. He's approaching the prime of his career, and he's had plenty of time to establish himself as this, as the main man for England. He's never really done it, and an 18-year-old Jude Bellingham walked in and kind of went, bench, mate.
Yeah, you think it's not even just players in that position. But you say Bellingham's a good example of that. Even Cole Palmer, who hasn't had as many England opportunities, he still had his moment in the Euros final with that goal. And you look at players like Bukayo Saka, Declan Rice, like young players who sort of come into their position and just sort of own it and are able to carry their club form over. And yeah, Foden's never really been able to do that. I do wonder if that's a consequence of something we spoke about a few weeks ago with regards to the sort of lack of progression of English coaches and just sort of coaching in general in this country for because I said it the other night after watching the Ireland game. I think no matter what you think of the next England manager, you can't deny that the crop of talent we've got coming through and have been producing over the last sort of 5-10 years is extraordinary, really. Like, the fact that there was 8 debutantes in this, or in the time that Lee Carsley's been in charge, and like every single one of them you look at and go, oh yeah, you could play at a major tournament for England. Like, no one really looks out of place.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to show how far behind we are in the coaching side of things, because like, as for all the good work Southgate did do for England, yeah, tactically was the sort of tactics was the main sort of sticking point with him, really, as to why we couldn't go over the line compared to other nations with equal talent, if we're being honest. So another reason why the FA needs to do more in that department, in my opinion, anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%. And it's hopefully it's another point, another non-English manager of the national team. Maybe that happening again will give him a bit of a kick up the arse, and and hopefully it's not going to be the next manager that comes in, is it? You can't kind of turn someone around that quickly, but another just kind of example of, look, there's still so much more that needs to be done. And like we've said it before, the starting point has been great with the whole England setup and the improvement of players coming through and all that kind of, like, from the grassroots up. Now it needs to be with coaching as well. You need to bring it all up at the same time, or at least start picking up the slack and allowing people and giving people the opportunity to do their coaching badges and get into coaching if they want to. So yeah,
I've still got faith that we'll see Lee Carsley in the dugout for Euro 2028. I'm all for it. I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Hey, we'll see what happens. Anything can happen. Kind of continuing on from the international discussion and the England team as well, actually. Scott Chapman, again, regular contributor, said, has anyone put a serious case forward to be included in the next England squad, even if all 9 withdrawals are fit? Madueke looked great. Livramento and Hall did really well. Curtis Jones. The amount of quality forward players we have is ridiculous, and Madueke is only added to that. Who gets picked? We can't really disagree with any of that. I think they've all been really good. I think Curtis Jones in the last kind of 18 months has really turned it on. I thought back end of last season he was very good. Second half of last year, and I think he started this season really well. And he was a big key part of that England squad that under Carsley, right? Running the midfield. And it looks like he's carrying that on and developing from there. There was a bit of quite a few Liverpool fans in my Discord, surprisingly. Don't know how they got lost there, but very unwelcome. But there was a lot of frustration with him over the past couple of years, that he wasn't quite stepping on. And maybe it's just taken an extra year or so for him, because I think he had a couple of injuries, hasn't he? And maybe it's just taken a little bit for him to get his confidence back. But he looks like a cracking player as well. And to be honest, the more midfield options England have, the better, because that is the one area, really, where we are a bit deathly thin. There's some really good young defenders coming through. Some really good attackers. Maybe striker is another position, but we've got Liam Delap, who looks like an absolute mutant coming through. So maybe he'll get a few games or something. But it's a good. I guess it's a good problem to have, having so many really talented players. For if there are a few players that can't make a tournament or make an international break, you've got an absolute swathe of players that you can bring in. The difficulty is going to be is if everyone's fit, who do you pick? And you know that whoever's left out is going to be the saviour. Whoever doesn't make it, remember when Grealish didn't make it to a tournament? It's well, if he'd have gone, would have won the World Cup. It's of course would. It'll always be that with whichever manager and whichever players do or don't make it. But yeah, I think there's a ton of really good players there. Livramento as well. I really rate him. I think he, especially when Kyle Walker has had such a shaky last 18, 24 months. You've got this young right back coming through looking and obviously James at Chelsea as well just can't stay fit. You've got this really good young right back coming through who's basically taking the shirt off Trippier's back at Newcastle as well, showing that he's well worthy of it. So yeah, hopefully he can see it. Another Chelsea graduate that got shipped out, but hopefully we can see him in the England squad a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I'd add another Chelsea graduate like that in Lewis Hall, I think that Scott mentioned. I think left back's been an issue for England for a while now, obviously with Luke Shaw. Again, just continuously injured. Ben Chilwell, another one, always injured, and form-wise hasn't been, when he has played, hasn't really looked all that convincing. We were in a situation in the last year as we were playing a 33-year-old right back at left back, which is, should never really be, it's not ideal preparation going into the tournament. But I think Lewis Hall is someone who I think it looked for a while that he's sort of the early stages of his career, didn't really look like no one really knew where he was going to go, because obviously he didn't really get much game time at Newcastle last year. But fair play to Eddie Howe. He's played the long game with him, brought him in this year and given him that starting place at left back. And he's had a really, really good start to the season, and he's deserved the England call up. And yeah, as Scott mentions, in terms of the amount of attacking options there are, it's obscene. You think without Bukayo Saka, you can still call upon players like Noni Madueke, Jarrett Bowen, and they just come in. And albeit, against Ireland and against Greece, not the best of opponents in the world, but for those sort of things, you are going to come up against teams like that in tournaments or even in qualification for tournaments. So to have players who can just step up in those games, if you do need to make some rotational changes or you just need to give some players a rest, it gives them a wealth of options going into World Cup qualification and should we get there, the tournament itself. But you're right, whoever does get left out, there is going to be just an absolute onslaught of criticism, like there always is with every England squad announcement. I wonder what my biggest question mark is, what he's going to do with the Foden, Bellingham, Palmer sort of conundrum, because they're all so talented and they all seem to play their best football in that one position, sort of in behind the striker in that number 10 role, and someone is going to have to miss out. And on current current format of all three of them, it looks like Foden is the one. Obviously, we're quite well away from a tournament coming up. We're still 2 years away, and obviously anything can happen that time. Form can go up and down or whatever. But yeah, it's almost an impossible decision to make because you're going to have to leave out an incredible talent. But this is what Tuchel's being paid the money for. He's got to make those decisions and keep the players he does leave out on side because you do need a squad for tournaments. So interesting to see how is able to manage that.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, they all play in the same position. We're kind of sleepwalking into a Gerard Lampard situation again, where there's so many people going, well, you've got to have them both in the squad. It's like, well, they both play in the same position and they can't. So all three of them, because they all perform best in that kind of float into. I think Bellingham could play a little bit deeper. Maybe the argument is you're not going to get the best out of him. It's like, well, would you rather have Bellingham on the pitch or not at all? It's like, okay, well, go and do a job a little bit deeper then. But especially with Palmer and Foden, they're playing such similar positions, not in a similar way, but playing such similar positions and take up similar positions on the pitch. It is going to be one or the other, or maybe just one out of the three. And it'll just be easy clickbait nonsense for theoretically sporting journalists to beat a German manager of the England squad over the head with. So it'll just be.
But we saw this against Greece, and again, as much as I say Greece aren't the toughest opposition, they are still, got decent players and are a well-organised, put-together squad. Carsley tried to, which I'm still convinced that he put that lineup out in the home game against Greece to sort of make a point almost. It's almost to go, right, this is what you want me to try and fit all these players in the same team? Fine, here it is. Let's see how it goes. Yeah. And it went terribly. You can't fit everybody in. And I think what people need to realise is, and again, we kind of had this with Grealish in the 2020 Euros, where he didn't start every game, but he was a really important player to bring off the bench in terms of, give us a different option out on the left-hand side, but also in terms of retaining possession, winning free kicks in dangerous areas and stuff. He became a really useful player, even though he didn't start every game. And it is a squad game, especially with the World Cup being extended to have more games and you're playing more teams. You're going to need your whole squad. So just because one player doesn't start one game doesn't necessarily mean he's out of favour. It just means he's not suited. He's not either not needed for one game, or he's not suited for one game, or he'll have a role to play later on. And people just need to chill out. Is essentially where we're at.
Look, Thierry Henry wasn't getting games for France. I'll just say that. They were winning stuff without him. Kind of to continue on with the international break, and you kind of touched there with the extension of the World Cup and more international games happening and more things. Vlam says, third international break and it's early November. How fucked up is this? It may sound clickbaity, but I really want the players to go on a strike. It's stupid and it's pushing me away from football. I haven't watched a full game since the last big tournament. The game's just feeling a bit dead and buried. I kind of get where he's coming from. It feels like you get 5 or 6 games and then you've got 2 or 3 weeks of international break. For no reason. Players are always complaining that they're playing too much and they can't play at the top of their level because they're all exhausted. They don't get a break, especially with international breaks and tournaments. Obviously, some players who don't get called up for their teams don't play as much, but they tend to be players that aren't going to be playing 60 games a year because they're not in European competitions and stuff as well. The vast majority of players from top clubs are going away on international duty. Unless you're Marcus Rashford. I wonder, is there a resolution for this? Because obviously the international tournaments are going to want to keep going. I don't see the Nations League going in anywhere anytime soon. It feels like there's fewer and fewer international friendlies, which on the one hand is a good thing because it means that they're less pointless. But at the same time, is it just kind of forcing players to play even more games than they needed to? You factor that in with the expansion of the European competitions now. You get playing 2 extra games there. There's deeper tournaments. The World Club Cup's expanded, and it feels like players never get any time off, to be honest. What was it from the end of the Euros until the start of the Premier League season and the rest of the European season? It's 2 weeks. From the end of a tournament to the start of another one, it was shorter than some international breaks. I don't know what the resolution is or how it gets resolved or whether it needs to be the domestic calendar, like American sports, is about 6 months long or 7 months long, and then there's a big break in the middle, and players who go into international tournaments have a month off at the start and a month off before the start of the season. The rest of them can do their tours of Asia or North America or whatever they want to do. But it might actually give players the opportunity to have a bit of time off and a bit of a break, because we're seeing more and more injuries. We're seeing more and more players kind of not be able to finish a season or not play to the best of their ability. Some players, like with the delay for the last Euros and then going at the World Cup in the middle of the with COVID, sorry, and then going at the World Cup in the winter, and then the truncated seasons either side of that. It feels like some players haven't had a month off playing football for 3-4 years, like, which is ridiculous. Yeah. And it's all it's going to do is just play into this like the issues that we're seeing of more and more top players being injured and missing more seasons, and it doesn't bode well for the future of the elite end of the game, because people are just going to be running at the ground.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's a depressing answer, but I think ultimately none of this is actually ever going to change, just because there's the reason there's more games is because it makes more money for FIFA, UEFA, whoever. Like the fact that, I think it speaks volumes, because I didn't know this until it was pointed out to me the other week, but like I thought it was all 3 European competitions played, now 8 games instead of 6. It's not. It's just the Champions League. In the Europa League, you still get 6 games. Conference League, you still get 6 games. Champions League, you get the extra 2. And it's like, I'm sure you can put forward the argument of like, oh, it's because there's because more teams, because of the more nations qualifying, more league winners, and all this, that, and the other. It's not. At the end of the day, they put the 2 extra games in there because it's 2 extra games to get broadcast revenue through. You add that to the Club World Cup that's FIFA are trying to push through, that nobody wants. Nobody wants a new reformatted version of the Club World Cup where there's like however many games being played and added to the calendar. You got enough players speaking out about how they don't want that. And the Nations League is something that I go back and forth with, because, and I'm fully aware in saying this is because I'm an England fan, and England are one of the bigger nations in football, or one of the bigger footballing nations, where we're going to qualify for tournaments most of the time anyway. So from my perspective, it's like, well, it doesn't really, I don't really see the benefit of the Nations League as an England fan. I absolutely understand the benefits of it for like smaller nations in terms of how it helps them qualify. I know like a big part of Georgia being in the Euros just gone was because of the Nations League, and them sort of doing so good in their group. It enabled them to, I believe, get a slightly easier qualification, or it helped sort of what pot they were put in or something like that. I can't remember the specifics, but my thing with the Nations League always is like, well, okay, I'll accept there is a benefit for smaller nations, but I still don't think it justifies having 3 international breaks a month after the season starts. Like, say we're in November now, and it's the 3rd one. We're not going to have another one until March, and they will be friendlies, but it just feels like there has to be a way where you can still have the Nations League and the benefits of the Nations League and what it does for other nations, but still reduce the amount of games being played, whether that's reformat the group system or reformat number of teams in each group or something like that. I'm not too sure. So it's obviously out of my remit to completely reformat an international football tournament. But yeah, it's, and in terms of what can be done, I've said before, if bigger clubs don't feel that they're already playing too many games and the League Cup is an extra burden they don't want to take part in, they can have an option to opt out, or they just have to play their under-23s. It could be a way of doing it, or I don't know. But ultimately, like I said, I just don't think there ever will be a significant push for reduction in games from the powers that be, because then they're the ones that lose out on money, and so why would they do something that affects their bank balance at the end of the day? Until there's something that comes in from the players' side, like from the union side, where I think we've said before, they put in their contracts, I'm only going to play X amount of competitive games this season, and that's all I'm signing up to play. Then I don't know. It does feel like we're at a bit of a breaking point with it, but I just don't know what that breaking point is going to be. Like you say, ACL injuries in particular seem to be on the rise. Players are getting injured and are out for a lot longer than they usually would have been. Like, if you think of how many big players have had ACL injuries in the past year alone, like, it's staggering.
I was going to say the breaking point seems to be inside the knee. So
yeah, but like, not to get too like deep with it, but like, is it going to be something as horrific as someone collapsing on a football pitch and passing away that's going to make them go, oh, maybe we are overworking them? Do you know? And I know the easy comeback is, well, they're multimillionaires. They get paid X hundreds of £1,000s a week. They're still human beings. They're not robots. Like, yeah. It's. There's got to be a way that you could, and ultimately it's just going to affect the products of football in the day. Like I say, the quality of games is going to decrease because everyone's going to be knackered. There's a reason why the Qatar World Cup, in terms of just quality of footballers on the pitch, stood out more than the more recent European international tournaments. Because in the middle of the season, everyone was at peak condition. Whereas if you watch the Euros, as it's all gone to knockout rounds, the games got worse, and it's because everyone's playing sort of like 20% slower. And they look knackered after half an hour. I wonder why that is. Like,
shock horror.
yeah, it's like I say, I feel that there is a big breaking point coming. It just doesn't. The scary thing is I don't really know what that looks like just yet.
Yeah, it's a concern. And it might turn into like Vlam says there. It may actually turn into the PFA going on strike, saying, "Look, we can't play this amount of games," because it's at the end of the day, it feels like short term gains in terms of getting more football on the TV and selling more sponsorships. The long term of it, though, is just players aren't going to be able to play for as high a level. So, yeah, I'm with him. It's weird, and it also kind of like feeds into this. Another thing for me of like, there's just so much football on all the time. It's almost like it's at saturation point now. Like I really like watching football, and there's days where it's like where there's a big game, and it's like I can't watch any more fucking football, man. Like I've watched 10 games over the weekend, and it's like there's the El Clasico, and it's like I ain't got the energy for this.
No, I've barely watched any of the Champions League games this year, just because and maybe it's because we do this, we sort of watch more of the Premier League stuff to have, so we make sure we're clued up to what to talk about on the when we record and stuff. But even then, it feels like over from Friday to Monday, you end up watching about 5 Premier League games like in full. It's very different from watching just an hour and a half match of the day highlight package.
Yeah.
And then to then go and watch a European game on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it's just like I need a break. It's like as much, and I'd love to keep up with like Serie A and the Bundesliga and the European competitions and the Championship, but like you say, it's just way too much at the moment. You need to, as much as I love football, I love Metallica. I don't listen to them every single waking minute of every day because I end up hating them after a while. So yeah, it's definitely definitely a big cause for concern. That.
Well, hopefully it doesn't lead to that for everyone, or else football's dead, guys, and the game will be gone. We'll take a bit of a change of direction, something a little bit more kind of light-hearted. I mean, maybe not for the people we might be discussing, but Mr. Cookie's come in and said, "Who do you guys think are among the worst managers of all time in the Prem?" I messaged you about this before and I said, all I can think is Ian Dowie. And I'll be honest, I can't even remember the teams that he managed. All I can remember is his face. So that's
it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Poor Ian. Yeah, because he took Palace up. I know that because they beat us in the playoff final, and I was there for that game when famous public masturbator Neil Shipley scored the winning goal. So. And that's not allegedly. He got found guilty of it, so I'm allowed to say it. Fucking bastard. But yeah. So I'm clearly over it. But yeah, so I know he managed Palace. He managed Charlton for a little bit, and I don't think he's managed a Premier League team since. I feel like he was probably Derby manager in that one season because I feel like they went for a few, didn't they?
According to Wikipedia, he was the manager of Hull for a bit.
That checks out. He's where the club where managers go to die.
Speaking of actually, Hull, there was another one, and it's more because of almost like the fake attention around it. It felt like a really manufactured attention on it, which is Phil Brown at Hull.
Yeah.
It just felt, I don't know what it was. The public dressing down in the middle of the pitch will forever be like just Premier League legend. And not only that, Jimmy Bullard taking the piss out of it after scoring a goal is just kind of just buries him completely. I'm not sure what jobs or if he's had any other jobs since that, but he felt like a particularly, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. Like that whole team in the Prem at the time felt weird anyway. And he just felt, he had real like I'm Hollywood vibes whilst being not Hollywood at all. I don't know whether it was just the fake tan or his swagger, his arrogance. Like he had a real a real dislikability to him.
There was a bit of Alan Pardew about him, wasn't there? Like Pardew had that, where he was like thought very highly of himself, just came across as a proper like smug twat, like sort of like. There's a great story of Alan Pardew when he's West Ham manager, and I think they're all having lunch in the canteen, and he comes over and like he's there with his staff, and there's like a physio there or something, And he goes, "Oh, your dessert looks good. I'm gonna have that. So I'm gonna have yours." And just takes it. And someone they look at him going like, "What are you doing?" He just goes, "You can do what you want when you're the king." And it's like, "Oh, mate." Like, what? And that is the sort of sentence that would come out of a man who did that dance on the Wembley dugout in the cup final. So,
what a bell end.
what a bell end.
Brown was a weird one. You know what? He gives me more cringeworthy Brendan Rodgers vibes. Brendan Rodgers has a similar kind of ick to him. It's like with his big, massive portrait of his own face in front of his front door.
If no one has seen the Liverpool Brendan Rodgers documentary, I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. Do yourself a favor. It is like real life version of The Office, which is within a football club. Yeah. It's fucking brilliant. Like, well worth your time if you get a chance to watch it. For me, I went with there's two ones for me. One name jumped out immediately, which has to be Frank de Boer. I mean, Jose Mourinho called him the worst Premier League manager of all time in a post-match interview, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, what was it like? 5 games managed, 5 defeats, no goals scored.
Elite, really.
In like that. Yeah, honestly, it's genuinely impressive to be that bad, and like sort of another victim of the Crystal Palace cycle of like, we'll get a Roy Hodgson or a Sam Allardyce in, right? We want to try and play a more attractive style of football. That guy comes in, does terribly, and they end up going back to a firefighter, and then the Crystal Palace cycle repeats itself. So yeah, he feels like an obvious mention. The other one I came up with, and it is personal for me, is Avram Grant, because I've seen West Ham be relegated twice in the Premier League, and I've seen some crap seasons of West Ham in the Premier League. Avram Grant's season in particular was the worst one by a country mile. Just awful. And the fact he got the job after relegating Portsmouth the season before felt quite egregious as well. Just no personality, didn't really have a clue what he was doing. Carlton Cole tells a story how they were on the training pitch. It got to like 9 o'clock and Grant still wasn't there. So Carlton Cole went to go find him, and he was just asleep in his office. Which kind of tells you everything you need to know. And weirdly, that man got to was one kick away from winning a Champions League, which is terrifying.
Well, thankfully he didn't. But yeah, was. I mean, Chelsea have showed it time and again that they can carry a crap manager to a Champions League final.
Yeah.
So and some of them will win it.
And that should be the ultimate. Like when we say you don't have to be like an outstanding manager to get through knockout tournaments. Avram Grant.
There we go.
Roberto Di Matteo. They are the examples.
Yeah, Di Matteo, man. That was a weird Chelsea era, that one, because it was all very close to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, if they definitely wanted to sack him, but it's like, oh, why did you have to go and win that for? Because we got to stick with you for another 3 months.
Yeah, the Ten Hag effect. Carrying on with a little bit of football nostalgia as we're looking back at managers. Jod's coming with another one, another question for us. It is something that I've heard discussed quite a lot, actually, and it is: was football actually better in the 2000s, or is it just nostalgia? My take on this has been, for quite a while, is I think the difference between the best players and the average players was much bigger in the 2000s. So the standout players looked like otherworldly. So you had you had Ronaldo, you had Zidane, you had Ronaldinho, and all these incredible players, and it felt like the difference between that level and the just pretty good players was much bigger. Whereas I feel like there's a much smaller differential between, like, taking prime Messi and Ronaldo out of this, between the elite players, like the ultimate elite players, like Vinny Jr. and these players and Jude Bellingham, these players you feel like they should be going for Ballon d'Ors, and just really good quality, like Premier League quality or La Liga quality players. I don't think the difference is that much these days. And I don't know whether that's the players aren't as good, or whether the floor has been lifted. But I also feel like the commercialization and the way that players are developed these days kind of beats individuality out of people. Like there's so many players who are system players, and like they'll thrive. Phil Foden's a perfect example, right? Wonderful player in the right system. It feels like there's not a lot of creativity and not a lot of individuality in the game. And you saw that with Grealish going to City, like exciting, kind of will beat a man. Was never prolific in terms of his assists or goals, but like he was a get you out of the seat kind of player. that's been trained out of him at Man City. Really effective, but like, where's the fun in that? I just don't think you have those kind of players coming through anymore. And if you do, because they're a bit of a maverick, a little bit of a live wire, like maybe they don't get that move to the big club because they won't kind of curtail themselves and fit into the little system that is hyper efficient at creating chances and negating chances and stuff. Like, I don't know if a Ronaldinho breaks through like he did. Now, like, you see loads of young players who are unbelievably talented in terms of their skills and entertainment factor, just kind of falling by the wayside and never really making that last push to being like an elite player. Neymar's the only one that I can really think of, like, who was a proper entertainer.
Yeah.
And even then, like, I mean, injuries kind of did for him a lot. But even so, like, his regression from after the first couple of seasons at PSG was pretty stark. And even now, like, the best players in the world, the most entertaining players in the world, like Haaland, hyper efficient striker, Mbappe, hyper efficient sprinter. Like, apparently he's crap at Real, but I wouldn't know. I can't watch any more football.
I think there's a lot to be said actually in terms of like players that develop differently. I think if you go back and watch football from sort of the early 2000s and that sort of era, I just think you have a lot more good technical footballers. Whereas now I feel like there is more of an emphasis on athleticism as opposed to technique and skill. Like, whilst obviously those things are important, I think there is more. I think nowadays in teams you'd rather stick a guy in there who's just quick rather than if they're any good or not. Do you know what I mean? Like Adama Traore being like an example of that. He's actually not very good at much. Like, can't cross, not very good in front of goal, but he's built like a tank and he can run really fast. So it's almost like, well, those positives outweigh all the negatives that come with his game. And I feel like there's been way more there's been way more of like an emphasis on that rather than like how good are they technically and how good are they like sort of footballing IQ sort of thing. Whereas I think you look back then, and like players like, you know, Henry and Vieira, like that Arsenal team, those United teams, like they were all athletic and big and like, you know, intimidating in that way. But they're also just really, really good footballers. You could tell could read the game really well, had really good footballing brains when they were playing, and I just don't really think you see as much of that. And then, you know, on the flip side of that, you don't get the sort of entertainment factor as much anymore, it feels like. And it might well be nostalgia, but like I know someone put this on Twitter the other day, is like, has there ever really been a player like JJ Okocha in the Premier League since he was there? The closest one I can think of, and it's only because obviously I saw him a lot over the last couple of years, but like some of the stuff Lucas Paqueta has done when he's been in form has been like I've never seen that before in a football match, because you just don't really see it that often at this level anymore at all, where he's trying to do like rainbow flicks and ridiculous step overs. But even then, it's on a much more reduced scale compared to what Okocha was doing, where he was just an entertainer as well as being obviously a brilliant footballer as well. I'm not surprised that there's like a nostalgia for football back then, because I do think there are elements to it that were just better. It felt like a lot more. I think the reason those players stood out more is because of how good they actually were, and it was more about the emphasis on their footballing ability rather than just can they do like the 100-yard sprint in like less than 30 seconds or whatever. Like,
and then you had the ones who were great footballers but also had the physique to do it as well, like, you know, Yaya Toure and, you know, these like just unicorn athletes who were footballers but turned out to be good athletes, rather than now it feels like you've got to be the athlete first and the footballer second. And I wonder whether, like, kind of going back to a previous thing we were talking about, I wonder whether how much of that is playing into the amount of injuries, just because not only the amount of games, but the pace of the game, the speed that everyone's running at, the size of everyone. Like, it feels like everyone's 6'3" and built like the side of a house. Yeah. Like, if you're going really fast and turning very quickly, the weakest point is going to break at some point. Like, there's only so much strength you can put in there.
Well, I was talking about this on stream the other day, actually. Because for context, I'm doing a Bordeaux save on Football Manager, and we've got Andy Carroll. We were talking about his career and stuff, and I remember reading from a former coach, I think it was at West Ham, who said, like, he's a brilliant footballer, and obviously his lifestyle contributed, like his lifestyle outside of football contributed to the amount of injuries he got. He maybe didn't look after himself as well as he could have done, but ultimately just the way he was built, like 6'5". Like, but still really strong, and like, but also very good with the ball at his feet, quite agile. Like, he is just going to pick up muscle injuries because the way he plays the game and his frame as well just contributed to a load of ankle and muscle injuries in his legs. Just because whilst it's easy to look back at Andy Carroll as just a big lump up front, he was on his day was actually very good with the ball at his feet and quite a when he wanted to be. When I say skillful, not in the sense of a JJ Okocha, but like he could get himself dig himself out of a tight space if he needed to, and sort of turn a defender and play someone in, sort of thing. So
it was like, really good football. He's he's not on the same level, but he's as close to I've seen as an English Ibrahimovic, like in the last
absolutely
as a big unit, but like can hold it up well. Is actually like will beat a man, can feint it. Obviously not going to run away from anyone, but I remember him scoring a few screamers from 20 yards that were pretty impressive as well. So I think some people just physically, unless you're going to be Johnny on the spot with everything in terms of your conditioning and training, and let's be honest, how many early 20s lads can be asked doing that unless you're like particularly psychotically driven. Like it's there's going to be something that fails at some point in that. Kind of continuing on from the nostalgia chat. I like the way that you've done this in order, because it does just feed into everything else. JJ Okocha might very well be in the discussion for this one, but who's the most underrated player in Premier League history? Keeney, who put the question in, says, and why is it Wayne Rooney? Whilst Wayne Rooney's usually my go-to, because I'm sure we've talked about this I'm sure we've talked about this, so it was probably on this podcast. I think Wayne Rooney suffers from recency bias.
Yeah.
And you just remember the end of his career rather than when he was one of the best footballers I've ever seen play football in his early 20s. He was obscene. I think there are other players who kind of can fall into the underrated or underappreciated tag. And is Wayne Rooney really underrated? I mean, he's Man United's highest ever goal scorer. He was England's record goal scorer. He's one of the most. I think he's the only player to get 200 goals and 100 assists in the Premier League. Kevin De Bruyne is knocking on that door now, I think.
Yeah.
But he was unbelievable player, but I don't know whether he was underrated. Or maybe it's just that, like I say, you remember the end of his career. More people remember the end of his career than the start of his career.
I think that's the thing. I underrated feels. I guess it depends how you define underrated. I think. Do you know what says a lot actually? When the documentary came out, I went and watched. Like obviously, I watched it, and when they're playing all the footage when he broke for Everton and when he first went to United, and in particular year 2004. You do find yourself watching it and going, "Fuck, he was like, he was as good as, or like in this." I think at that point, had it not been for like sort of injuries, sort of stunting him a little bit. But I think that the raw talent he had would probably put him in the same bracket as, or as close to Messi and Ronaldo of that era, or at least he was going to be England's version of that. Like he was that good.
He was so exciting, and but he was scarily quick. But also built like a bowling ball. Like he just bounced off people and barrel through shit. Like he was like him at Man United is like my formative, where I really kind of got into football and really took an interest in it. So like I just have that stuff on repeat in my head whenever anybody talks about Wayne Rooney, because he was just on his day, and for long. On his day wasn't once every few months. It was 5 out of 7 games, like just unplayable and angry.
Yeah.
Like he played angry all the time, and it was just a terrifying player to watch. He's he had a bit of again, this is like only from what I've seen of clips and things, but he had like a bit of that Maradona's about him, because he'd barrel into people and be angry and like kick people
with an edge.
Yeah, like and take things a bit too far. Whereas, obviously Lionel Messi's probably the best person ever to lace him up. Cristiano Ronaldo's broken every goal scoring record. He's the best goal scorer the game's ever seen. But there was something about like Wayne Rooney's just, like I say, played angry, like, and it was so good to watch.
Yeah, and I think the reason he's looked at as underrated by some, and I've definitely been of that opinion in the past. It's that balance of like, is he underrated or just underappreciated, and sort of what camp does he fall into? But I do think you look at, and again, I do think it is recency bias. I think there's also a little bit of England bias in there as well, because after Euro 2004, never really delivered on that stage. Really, like you think of like I think the following World Cup he got sent off for stamping on Carvalho's bollocks, and obviously there was
What a lad.
there was yeah, what a guy. And there was obviously the World Cup in 2010 with the swearing at the fans, and like he just never really did it, and it always felt like, this isn't his fault. But it always, towards the end of his career, it just felt like England managers were shoehorning Wayne Rooney in because it's Wayne Rooney, and he suffered for it, and the England team suffered for it. Again, that's not Rooney's fault in the
It was
slightest.
the same thing with David Beckham, though, wasn't it? Like you have such an iconic guy who's been such a centre part of the squad and the captain for so long that you kind of feel like, oh well, he still needs to be in there. Even when I think he himself was saying to the manager at the time, I think was it McLaren saying, I shouldn't be in the squad.
Yeah.
Like from what I've heard, what you said in interviews and things like that. But yeah, he's again, I don't think he goes down as underrated. I think he's going to be. I don't know if he's already in the Hall of Fame, but he'll be Hall of Fame at the first time of asking. And if he's not, there's something that's gone very wrong there.
I will say, if there is anyone listening who is of like sort of 20 years of age or younger, and you've only seen Wayne Rooney in the sort of back end of his career, sort of in this season at United, and then at Everton and at Derby or whatever, and you think, oh, it wasn't that good. Go and watch go and watch the documentary. Go and watch clips of his sort of. Go and watch all his Man United goals.
Go watch the Euro 2004 because he played like a man possessed in that. I think he was only 18.
Yeah.
It was just before he signed for United. He was unbelievable. I'm going to throw like a bit of a. Again, I don't know whether he's underrated. He might fall into the underappreciated. But Mo Salah might be one of the best players to ever do it in the Premier League. And whilst I think he is very highly regarded, obviously, and like obviously Liverpool fans love him, and I think he suffers from the fact that he might win another one this year. He's only won one Premier League title. He's not in that group of like, multiple winners at Man United or Arsenal or Man City now. His on the field success, relatively. I mean, I know he's won a couple of Champions Leagues, but like relatively to in comparison to a lot of his peers, especially modern peers at Man City, doesn't stack up. But in terms of his ability to win a game, change a game, how good he's been for such a long period of time at Liverpool, and I think he's in a discussion with himself for being the best right forward the Premier League's ever seen. Maybe not right winger, but like the best right-sided forward. I don't think there's many players that could lay a glove on him, to be honest. I think he's unbelievable. And that's from me as a Man United fan.
Like he's just been consistently operating at a world-class level the entire time he's been at Liverpool, really. Like I think we said before, in a quiet season, he still gets you 25 goals.
Which is insane,
in a season where he's like, oh, Salah's been a bit off it this year. Like, I don't know. I understand why when we talk about the best in the world, we look at trophy hauls and stuff and winners' medals, and I understand why that factors into the conversation. But I do think there are occasions where it's almost like, not that it doesn't matter, but it's kind of like it almost shouldn't diminish his reputation. I know that's not what you're saying. I know you're sort of saying that might be why people don't speak about him in the way they speak about other players. But like, I mean, Thierry Henry only won three Premier League titles at Arsenal. Like, but he's still regarded, rightfully so, as one of the best strikers to ever play in the Premier League, maybe the best. And I think when we're in an era so much now, I've only really noticed this over the last 12 months where like a player will play well for 2 or 3 games and you'll see a tweet from Sky Sports News or whoever going, is so-and-so the best in the world in his position, or the best player in the world right now, or the best midfielder or the best defender or whatever. Like people seem very... Football Punditry seems very quick at the moment to ask that question of like, is so-and-so the best in the world at this thing right now? And we seem to be obsessed with like defining someone as the best in the world. And Salah has never been in that conversation, which is absolutely insane to me. And whilst he's only won one Premier League title, he's won everything there is to be won at Liverpool over the period of time that he's been there. And whilst, Firmino's gone, Mane's gone, like a lot of that Klopp team and even Klopp himself is gone, Salah is still there just every single season, hasn't dropped off barely at all. And yeah, I think it's crazy to me that like, as much as I don't really pay much attention to the Ballon d'Or rankings, I don't even think he got in the top 10, which is insane. If we're talking about just like best players in the world at this current moment in time, I think is ludicrous and shows how flawed the Ballon d'Or system is. But yeah, he's an exceptional player. The only other player I know we spoke about in the past in terms of underrated in Premier League history, and I think he's gone on to become underrated since he's retired, is David Beckham, because I think the the celebrity David Beckham overshadows how good of a footballer he actually was. Again, you watch that documentary that came out last year. You sort of watch all the footage of him. You think, yeah, there was no like for a moment in time there was no one. There was no right wing or right midfielder like him in world football. He was an unbelievable talent.
For 2 or 3 years, he was the best player in the world. Like, I've maintained this. I'll say this. At 99-2000, United win the treble. They don't do it without David Beckham. Yeah, he didn't get the most goals. He probably got the most assists. I don't know. I've not actually looked at the figures. But he turned up and did it in the most important time. Like, incredibly consistent all the way through the season. Scored the goal against Spurs that meant that we could win win the Premier League. He scored the equaliser against Arsenal, and then that meant that we could, set up and get to the final and then beat Newcastle. Set up basically both goals in the final of the Champions League. Like in the big games, I don't know if there's rarely been a much more clutch player than David Beckham. Like you see it for England as well. Like that free kick against Greece. Like the amount of times where he just kind of go, no, right, I'm not having this. It's like, give me the fucking ball.
He basically played that Greece team.
Yeah.
He basically played that Greece team by himself because England were crap in that game. Like legit, that whole England team were rubbish in that game, and Beckham was like the only one who go, "No, fuck this. We're going to the World Cup.
Yeah.
Like, I'll do it myself." Like he was just an incredible player.
Yeah, and I followed his career a little bit after he left United, but like he felt like a player that he didn't semi-retire. That's too harsh to say, but it felt like his level dropped off pretty quickly. Not in terms of his ability, but maybe his commitment to the game. And when you hear him talk about like when he left United, like he didn't want to leave Man United. Like he said, I couldn't even look at the scores of Man United. I wonder whether he just kind of fell out of love with the game a little bit after that. Like, because he was a Man United fan who came through the academy and basically got turfed out because the manager thought that he wasn't switched on enough, even when he was still probably one of the best players in the world. You know, and it's like, I don't want to play for anyone else. It's like, well, yeah, he might break your heart a little bit and he might turn off. And then, you get the opportunity to go and try and do some experimenting in America, and you see what that's ended up with him having a club in the league as well. It's it was a weird moment because it was definitely the Galacticos era of Real Madrid, and he kind of like, it felt like he got lost in the melee of all that a little bit because it was just throw as many players in, many of the most famous players in the club rather than depending on like worrying about how good they are.
Well, he got kicked out of the team for a little bit, didn't he? Because Carlos Queiroz became manager shortly after he joined, which must have been a great feeling after him being Ferguson's assistant. Oh, fucking brilliant! But yeah, I think he got left out the Real Madrid team for ages, and then like didn't really get his way back into like his last season there, where he helped him win the league, I believe. Yeah, like it's so I think that coupled with, like you say, not wanting to leave United and being forced out, I wouldn't blame him if he sort of fell out of love with the game and had one eye on retirement for a few years after that. But even then, to go and play for PSG and AC Milan in the twilight years of your career, like still got to be operating a pretty decent level.
He wasn't bad, was he?
No, the only other one I want to give a mention to, and there's loads I could do. Like I could sit here and rave about Michael Carrick for 2 hours, but I'm not going to. But like I do want to say that, and this isn't really. I know the end of his career wasn't great, and I do blame Jose Mourinho for. It's like what we said earlier about like taking the personality out of players. I don't think I can ever really forgive Jose Mourinho for what he did to Joe Cole, because Joe Cole was like, Joe Cole was exceptional when he came through at West Ham, and like the year I got into football was the year we went down with 42 points. So I only saw him play for West Ham for that, until he came back for that 1 year. But what a special talent, man, and like not used enough by England, I don't think. And again, I do think when he went to Chelsea, Mourinho came in, he sort of trained a lot of that flair and a lot of that personality and that sort of street football elements Joe Cole out of his game. And he was a very effective player in that Chelsea team for the time he was there. And I know the Liverpool move didn't work out, and he ended his career playing in France and various other places. But Joe Cole should have gone on to be a better player than his career sort of showed, if that makes sense. But as a raw talent, I think people forget how good Joe Cole actually was when he
might have just come through at the wrong time. Like I say, like 10 years previous, or even 5 or 6 years previous, he probably had the scope to be that kind of flair number 10, that everyone wanted to have in their team at that point. But it just kind of got swallowed up by the juggernaut of efficient football that Jose Mourinho turned into. Like, how do we win every game? 1-0. Which is incredibly boring. We'll do a brief touch on this. It's Jord again. On like we've discussed, like, you know, the difference of players over the years and all that kind of stuff. Just a very quick one. Could Messi really do it on a cold Tuesday night in Stoke? I mean, I've seen him do it on the top of a mountain in Peru, in the Copa America. So yeah, he could probably do it on Stoke with a bit of wind, you know.
Yeah. There was a weird like time when Messi was at Barcelona where it was like there was this conversation about, I think because he hadn't scored at English grounds very often. So it was kind of like, well, he's not very good against English teams, so like maybe he wouldn't be very good in the Premier League. But that's like, by saying that, you still forget the amount of goals he did score against English opposition in the Champions League. Just happens to be at the Nou Camp, like, or in Champions League finals. Like,
yeah, cheers, Leo.
You know, yeah, like the idea, and it's not really mentioned anymore. But I think, you know, there was a time, I remember it, when there was people making genuine arguments that Messi wouldn't be as good in the Premier League as he was in Spain, which I just think is a complete nonsense, to be honest. Like,
well, he might not have got the same numbers, but he'd be still be the same player. Like, you know, it's you just see the disparity between, you know, goal numbers generally between the Premier League and most of the leagues, because I think there's a more even keel. Obviously, there's still the elite like the top teams that will win and score more than most of the teams, but I think the quality from top to bottom is much higher. Like, I think there's a lot fewer teams that will challenge the top teams from the bottom in Spain and Italy and Germany and France. Like, there tends to be whipping boys, and there's not as many in the Prem. Even teams in the relegation zone can give you a proper pacing if you don't turn up. Rinstar's come in with a question for both of us. I'll ask you this, and then you can ask the one to me. So, for Breezy, your thoughts on David Moyes' comments of his contract situation on the overlap before he left this summer? I'll be completely honest, I didn't watch that overlap interview because I couldn't think of anything more boring than listening to
I didn't watch it
David
either.
Moyes.
Yeah. No, I didn't watch it either, but I've seen the clip because obviously West Ham pages picked it up and shared it around and everything. So just for context, if anyone hasn't seen it, Moyes says that after beating Arsenal last season at the Emirates 2-0, for those wondering, or was it 2-1? Either way, we beat them. It was glorious. He says that Sullivan offered him a contract. He wasn't happy with the terms, so he didn't sign it, and then he sort of rather generously goes, "Oh, we only lost about the next, I think we lost like the next 3. That wasn't true. I think we lost the next 6, which started with us drawing Bristol City, and we didn't win a game."
Well, you did lose the next 3, and then the next 3 after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if he gets that. Yeah, because it's like, I think one of the games was Forest. It's like, nope, that was in February. That we were on like a 6-game losing streak by that point. I remember it well. So yeah, I think he's been a bit generous with the truth there. But yeah, he was unhappy with the terms. I believe, given what we've seen this summer, that one of the terms was you're not going to have as much, if not any, control over recruitment. That's all going to go to the technical director. Moyes, being the manager that he is, obviously wants full control of that. So I don't think he was happy with that. But he said, yeah, basically after going on a run of losing games, David Sullivan pulled the contract off from the table. And Rich Gary Neville was like, "Oh, you can't do that. No, I don't like that. That's awful. That's a really bad way to do business with someone." Now, for my thoughts on it, and this is how much those comments have annoyed me, because I now have to sit here and defend David Sullivan, which is my least favorite thing to do in the world. David Sullivan absolutely did the right thing, in my opinion, because if you offer someone a contract, and there's reduced terms in terms of like we've hired someone to do recruitment. You signed Calvin Phillips in January. So like, and not to mention as well, like, I could give you and you know, the jury is out on a lot of signings that West Ham made this summer, of course, but I could give you a list of players that West Ham have signed under David Moyes for big money that have gone off, end up being sold a year later for nowhere near as much. Like players like Gianluca Scamacca, players like Nikola Vlasic, players like Naif Aguerd. Again, Calvin Phillips obviously was a £6 million loan deal, and which you in terms of Premier League money, doesn't sound like an awful lot. But when you think about how bad Calvin Phillips was, it looks a lot worse. So I think that was more than fair enough, because West Ham under Moyes' recruitment spunked a lot of money up the wall and didn't get a real return on any of it, really. Bar, like, you know, and he did get a lot of signings right, obviously, Souček, Soufal, Bowen, players like that. But yeah, so I think but then to turn down a contract based on reduced terms and then going to lose your next 6 games in a period where West Ham didn't look like they were able to score goals. Lucas Paqueta got injured. We looked completely devoid of any creativity, and we were leaking goals for fun. Of course, what else? What else are you meant to do as a chairman in that situation? Go, well, you want us a trophy, so we're on this downward slope. Here's a new 2-year contract. No, like, I think Sullivan did the right thing in going, well, look, you turned down the first offer. The form has now gone off a bit of a cliff. Let's maybe hold off on it. And I think Moyes even said himself, oh, yeah, I feel we're best to wait till the end of the season. So to then paint himself as like almost a victim, like saying like, oh, they took the contracts away from me. You didn't sign it. Like, that's on you at the end of the day.
They offered a contract. He turned it down and then went, all right.
Yeah. Like,
we'll get the next manager then.
Yeah, to sort of frame it in a way of like, oh, the contract was always there and I was waiting to sign it. I was just, I lost my pen. Like, and then they took it away from me after losing a couple of games. Like, I think it's a very generous version of what probably happened, to make himself look better and make West Ham look bad for getting rid of him, which of course is the thing to do, given that West Ham aren't having a good season this year. So why not take an opportunity to make yourself look like the greatest manager of all time?
Yeah, I mean, you're not top 4, so you obviously shouldn't have sacked David Moyes because he was guaranteed to get you Champions League football every year.
Exactly. So yeah, I like I didn't watch the whole interview. I saw bits and bobs from it. And that's the thing on the recruitment stuff. I skimmed through it. In the same interview, he even says like, oh, it's back in the old days. Sometimes you take a chance on a player. If it doesn't work out, you just go, oh, I'll just get rid of him next season. Like, doesn't matter how much money we lose on him, just get rid of him. It's like, well, there you go then. Like, you can probably get away with that when you're spending £2-3 million on a player. But when you're spending £35 million on them, and after a year go, don't want him anymore. Just at any price, just get rid of him. You can't do that. That's not in the current FFP climate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, so yeah, no sympathy from him. As far as I'm concerned on that one, that is fully on him and whoever his agent was, quite frankly.
Yeah, and we've talked about it, ad infinitum. But like at the end of the day, it was the right time to go. He shouldn't have been given a new contract. Would have likely been seeing the exact same thing from him this season.
Yeah,
it was just the right time. It was the right time. And if it doesn't work out with Lopetegui, it doesn't work out with Lopetegui. It doesn't mean that sticking with David Moyes was the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rinsar's question for you is Garnacho not celebrating when he scored and the subsequent meltdown that has come with it. A nothing story is the new scapegoat, or is there a deeper problem with one of United's brightest stars? Now, I didn't see this at the time, but obviously I went back and watched, and yeah, he scores a really good goal and just doesn't celebrate, does he? So
yeah,
and yeah, a lot was made out of it.
Yeah, I think he just. I don't know. Maybe someone had his ear through the game, because I mean he's been off form. He's not been great this season. He scored a couple of important goals, and he's an incredibly talented kid. I just think he's almost suffered from the lack of options that United have up front. The kid's 19, maybe 20 now. Like he should be playing the odd game. He should be coming off the bench. He looks so much better as an impact player. Like coming off the bench, because his final ball's not that great. Like his decision making isn't great, but if he's coming fresh off the bench on the 60th, 70th minute against the tired fullback, like he's terrifying because he is electric and he will take you on. He's not scared to try and beat you, even if he doesn't 5 times. He might do on the 6th. That's the way his brain works. And yeah, he's frustrating to watch as a United fan, like especially when he's playing a full 90, and you're seeing that. Like that lack of decision making in the final third kind of come through. Yeah, it's frustrating. And like I say, maybe he's seen it, like, he's probably perma online like most people are these days, and he's seen a bit of criticism about it. I don't think it means that United fans don't like him or want him to go or anything. I think it's just like everyone wants him to be better. And it's like, oh, but maybe he's just seen his arse about it. Bruno said he felt like the United fans had been on his back a little bit, so he didn't feel like he wanted to celebrate, and I think that's what it was. I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but getting criticism from the viewing public is something that he'll need to learn to deal with because he's a footballer, and if he can't deal with that, then he's never going to succeed. The jury's still out on whether he is going to be an elite footballer. I think he's an entertaining and fun player right now, and he's a kid, so we'll see what happens. I don't think there's an issue. I think it's like mountain out of a molehill. Nothing story.
Yeah. The Man United way.
Yeah. Basically, it was obviously it's a Man United player with a slight bit of controversy. So obviously, it was the leading news article on every sports publication for about 10 days. So
Yeah.
no, but yeah, we'll see how he goes. I like the kid. He does look like Simple Jack though.
Yeah. Oh my god, he does. That is the first time I've heard that comparison, and now I will never be able to unsee it. So cheers for that.
Wayne Hope has got a question for both of us. He says, does the amount of international players flooding into West Ham and Man United affect your love of the club? Like, would you take a relegation if it meant the squad was filled with local lads like Noble and the Nevilles? I'll answer that. No, I don't care. It's a global sport. It's a global game. It's always going to be the reason that there was fewer international players 20, 30 years ago is because nobody really found those kind of players. There were lots of international players were playing in their domestic leagues. Like a lot of South Americans stayed in South America, or they moved to kind of other nations that speak those languages. But it's just the globalization of football. Like the broader the scope, the broader the techniques of scouting players and finding players with things like YouTube and Y-Scout and all these things. It doesn't really mean that it doesn't take away from the love of the game. If it just means that your players speak in a different language or have an accent, and that's not a problem at all. Like, I mean, if you've got a problem with people from different countries and who have different accents, then you've got deeper issues to be dealing with. So,
no, I think for me, I feel like I know where the question's coming from. Like, I think obviously it means a little bit more when you see a player doing well who's come from your club's academy and is a bit of a local lad. Like, obviously, you've had it with players like Marcus Rashford and just the class of '92 in general, right? And yeah, to have someone like Mark Noble, who's a West Ham fan, come through and captain the side and all this, and even players like Declan Rice, who come from the academy and go on to do what he's achieved. Like, you end up gravitating towards those players more as a fan. I feel like just even subconsciously, because you have a bit more of a relatability with them. But at the same point, whether they could be from Canning Town or Casa del Sol, I don't like, as long as they come in and give, and for me anyway, as long as they come in and give everything for the badge and treat what I see as like a privilege to play for West Ham United with the respect that I think it deserves, which I know sounds a bit wanky, but like it's that's just how I see it. Like then it's all good. Like, you look at, I think the biggest example of that in recent years from a West Ham perspective is Pablo Fornals. Like, he was a player that we signed from Villarreal, like when he was a young upcoming kid, and just completely absorbed himself in like the West Ham culture and stuff. Like, became a cult hero. And not even, I feel cult hero and does him a bit of a disservice. Like, he played a really important part in us winning our first trophy in 40 years. And like, there was a lovely video that went around the other day. A bunch of West Ham fans flew out to watch a Real Betis game just to go and see him. And they brought like a West Ham, and he went over and saw him after the game and stuff. And he absolutely adores the club. And we've had that with players in the past, whether it be like Yossi Benayoun or like the Czech boys like Souček and Soufal in recent history, or Sebastian Schemmel, who's like a French right back from like the early 2000s, who since retiring went and opened a bar in like Spain and named it after the Bolin. Like, it's stuff like that. It doesn't, like I say, to me, it doesn't matter if you're not local to the area or even the country. Like, as long as you come in and it's the thing West Ham fans want. As long as you come in and work your bollocks off for the shirt, the fans will love you. So yeah, as much as it would mean, as much as it means a little bit more to see a youth player do really well, but a foreign player can come over and have that same effects in just in a different way. So, yeah,
no, I agree. And as as a Man United fan, like, a lot of our iconic players aren't from the local area. Like, obviously there's a class of '92, but Roy Keane's probably one of our greatest ever captains, came over from Ireland. George Best came over from Northern Ireland. You've got Brian Robson came from the Northeast. Same with Bobby Charlton. You've got Cantona coming from France. You got all of these iconic players that have been massive parts of Man United, and some of the best players and captains, and leading from the front. Being actual massive Man United fans as well as playing for the club. It doesn't matter where they're from. Like you say, as long as they give a shit about the club and want the club to do well and do what seems right for the club, I can give a shit where you're from. As long as you're good.
Yeah, just be good. Just run around, like try. Just put some effort in. Love it. And again, you could be I've seen English players do this. They turn up and just don't bother trying. Like on the, you know when you see him, it's obvious. When you're you're watching the play and go, you cannot be asked today. That is the most egregious thing. For me as a footballer.
Well, Luke Shaw's been at Man United for 5 years, and he'd rather play 85 minutes at a Euros than 6 months for Man United. So.
There is a bonus question from Wayne Hope. What's Dan's thoughts on the Premier League having some sort of playoff system for a European spot? Now, to give you some context to this, I spoke about this on stream the other day. It's a tweet I saw from James Alcott, obviously one of the more prominent football guys on YouTube, who put this out at the back end of last season, I think around the time the sort of Football League playoffs happening. It is his idea for a Premier League European place playoff. So how it would essentially work is 4th to 7th makes the playoffs, and then the winner of those playoffs gets the Champions League spot. The finalists or the runner-up will get the Europa League, and the 2 losing semi-finalists will play a 3rd place playoff, and the winner of that gets the Conference League. So essentially, what you do is a team who finishes 7th could end up feasibly getting Champions League football, which I know this sounds hypocritical, given I just complained about the additional games that are being played. I think that'd be fucking mint. I think that'd be so good, just to add a little bit of like added drama at the end of the season, and like more incentive to get in the top 7 in a way, because then like rather than sort of just pushing for 4th, you know what I mean? I think that would add a real good level of spice to the league.
I don't hate it. I think the thing with that is like, well, you could argue that the whole 38 games is a playoff to see who gets the European places. Like that's I like the idea of the cups mattering though. I think the winner of the FA Cup should get a Champions League spot.
Yeah,
I've said this before. Like, I mean, granted, yeah, Man City or like someone who finishes in the Champions League spots will usually get to a final or make the Champions League, but that's because a lot of teams are too busy concentrating on the domestic campaign to try and get as high up the table as possible. I know the League Cup winners get like it's almost like a first refusal on the Europa League, right? So I
think they get Conference League now.
Is it Europa Conference League? So
yes, I think League Cup gets Conference, FA Cup gets Europa.
Right. Yeah, well, you could do it so that the League Cup gets you a Europa League spot or the Conference League spot still, and then the 2 finalists are guaranteed a Europa League spot in the FA Cup. The winner gets the 4th Champions League spot. Obviously, depending on the coefficient, that might be the 5th place. So you could get another spot down, and it doesn't matter where you finish. But I like that because it might just mean that teams actually give a shit about the FA Cup again.
Yeah,
because no one really does. Like the people rotate and kind of aren't really that bothered about getting any distance into it. And the argument for it, like the argument is, oh well, Wigan have won an FA Cup, and teams who haven't got into the Champions League have won the FA Cup, and how would they do in the Champions League? It's like shit. Like 4 teams went into the Champions League from last year from England, and they didn't win it. Like,
yeah,
you could still have other teams not winning it, and if nothing else, you've got a team who's shown that they're really good at cup football going into a cup competition. Why not let them have a go? Like, if you want to go and win a European Cup, put them in a cup competition in Europe. Like, have a cup competition as the tryout or the qualification process for it. So I'd be up for that. I like the idea of that. But yeah, I don't hate the idea of the playoff. It is adding into that more games in the season.
Yeah.
That's the only downside to it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like the idea. I do like the idea of having playoffs though in the Premier League. Like having a relegation playoff or something. Like the bottom 2 go down, the 4 above that, you're playing. You're in a knockdown tournament.
I'm not a fan of that. For non-biased reasons, I'm not a fan of that at all.
Sean Dyche just started sweating. He doesn't know why.
Yeah. Get Moist back now, for the love of God.
Well, continuing on the knockout and the cup tournament discussion, Antichrist 7, fantastic name, has asked us, is the new Champions League format better than the proposed Super League? I've got a very brief thought on that. It's basically the same. They saw it and went, should we just do that? And then all these teams will shut up. And then they did it. And then the Super League's not reared its ugly head again. Although, for how long, we don't know. Because there's more and more teams losing money. Big teams losing money, struggling for cash. If they can sneak into a Super League to get part of some unlimited pot of cash, it's only going to be a matter of time, especially the more multi-billionaire owners that are supposedly very legally pumping money into clubs.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, just to say, well, there's another question after this. It says from George again, saying now we're in a good chunk into the new European format. What are your thoughts on it? Like, again, the two questions do kind of go hand in hand. I'm just not a fan of it, and like I don't know whether it's just me being like my version of a traditionalist, because obviously another person's version of being traditionalist with it is only the league winners getting, which I understand, but like I don't see the point in having the 2 extra games. And whilst initially it was like, oh, like the second game of the campaign is like Real Madrid versus like PSG or Inter Milan v Arsenal or whoever, like you get bigger ties earlier in the rounds, which I understand the appeal of that, but for how long is that going to be exciting? Like I can see after a couple of years it just becomes another game. Whereas I feel like at least in the group stages, usually at least once a season there will be a team that comes out of nowhere and does really well. Like I think of like Sheriff beating Real Madrid at the Bernabeu a few years back, or like Celtic beating Barcelona and getting out of the groups or whatever, or even like a big team not doing very well, like like say Man United have struggled in recent years, or like Barcelona finishing third and dropping to the Europa League a few years back. Like I think there was actually more, because it was a smaller group of teams, there was more jeopardy. Whereas with the new league format, I just don't feel like there's as much jeopardy. And I know that people will say that the Champions League wasn't really exciting up until the quarterfinals, but I'm kind of like, with that, I'm kind of like, well, for the neutral, maybe not, but when it's something like that, does the neutral's opinion really matter? Like, 'cause I'm sure if you're even with a Man United fan, you get a decent draw in the round of 16, we think I can get through it. For a Man United perspective or an Arsenal perspective or whoever, that's exciting, because all of a sudden you can start maybe seeing a pathway to get into the final and winning it. Like, I understand it's a product that the neutrals shoot into and watch and stuff, but like, again, should we really be prioritizing what the neutrals want over what fans of those clubs want? Like, I find the idea of like, if you're an Arsenal fan and every single season you're in that league phase, you're guaranteed to play like an Inter Milan or a PSG or a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, whoever. Does it not make that less special? Like, I remember when West Ham were in the Europa League, obviously it's on a smaller scale, but played a few, like, I think it was like Dinamo Zagreb, Rapid Vienna, and I can't remember who the other team was in our Europa League group. But then you get to the knockouts, and it's like, we got Sevilla, and then we get Lyon, and then we could get Frankfurt or Barcelona. Like, you almost, like, having that build up to then face the bigger teams later in the competition from a fan perspective was way more exciting than if it was just, oh, game week 3 we've got Lyon, or game week 3 we've got, like Atletico Madrid or something, or like whoever's in the Europa League from that country this year. Like, it just kind of dilutes it a little bit, and for me, that's just not what playing in Europe should be, really.
Yeah, I get that. The counter argument to that would be Newcastle got to play PSG at St James's in their first Champions League game in 20 years, like 30 years, whatever it was.
Yeah, of course.
And that was great because you saw PSG lose. So everyone loves watching PSG lose, even if it's Newcastle. Yeah, I kind of feel the same. And again, it just kind of plays into what I was saying earlier. There's just too much football. Like, too much football. There's big games that I just can't be bothered watching because there's too much football. I also, on a more kind of boring note, it just doesn't feel like, because of the way that the games are drawn. Yeah, I know you've got X amount of games between pot 1, X amount of games between pot 2 and all that kind of stuff. But, you could have a draw away against PSG and at home against Ajax. It's like, well, where's the fairness in that? Like, you're likely going to get battered by PSG. Whereas if you get a home leg and an away leg, you actually get to see who the better team is.
Yeah.
Over the 2 legs. And like with this, it kind of like throws it all up in the air. And I don't know. It's just, again, it just feels a little bit soulless. If this is the solution to teams that were trying to get into a Super League, they've just made Super League without the funding that the Super League was going to give them. And it's just going to make the teams realize that, oh, we can do this. We can play in this format, and this format does work. And then they'll just get whoever's funding it to do it again. Just go, oh, well, we're just going to do the exact same thing, except you all get £1 billion. It's like, okay.
Let's say that's definitely where it feels like it's going. It's just a way for trying to hold on to what control they do have. But you look at City are in a back and forth with the Premier League at the moment, and I know that's not UEFA, but they've had issues with UEFA in the past. You think if stuff doesn't go their way, they could conceivably just go, do you know what, sod this. Like, fuck what the community thinks. We'll just. And then you see that City fans don't like the Premier League. They don't like the UEFA. They boo the shit. So it's like it's conceivable to think that City could quite easily convince their fans that actually we're better off without this, and they go along with that, and then that could just be the domino effect for other clubs in England to follow suit, and then that'll be the death of the Premier as we know it. So look forward to that, viewers.
Hooray! Well, if they just get their wrist slapped anyway, it'll be the death of the Premier League anyway, because it'll just be Calciopoli 2, and all the sponsors will leave. So
yeah.
Anyway, on that cheery note, we'll finish on a kind of a bit of a tangent. Jord's got really involved in this. Thanks for all the questions, mate. No, genuinely likes some really good ones. He said a Gaelic footballer recently kicked for the New York Giants. Which non-football sports stars could make it in professional football? I'm going to be really boring and say I've heard interviews with loads of sports people from other sports saying we couldn't do football. You hear it with the NFL guys all the time saying we did a training session with these footballers and we were dead after 30 minutes. I think the combination of long distance cardio and body mobility and skill, unless you've been playing it since you were a child, like the vast majority of footballers have been, and just happen to be incredibly physically gifted, as well as, like I said earlier, be psychotically driven to want to get to that level. I don't think you can. I think there are other sports that have got a little bit more of a bit of a crossover, but I don't. Other than long distance cyclers or marathon, long distance runners and things, I just don't think they'd have the actual stamina to do 90 minutes at the pace and tempo that the football match happens at. And that's not footballers are better athletes than anyone else. It's not that, because there's footballers couldn't do things in other sports that other sporting people do. It's just a completely different skill set. That's all it is.
I was gonna say, it feels like that's the way it could end up going. Is eventually we're just gonna stop looking for footballers and start looking for sprinters. There's just gonna be every player on FC 25 is gonna have 90 pace and 30s for their technical.
Harry Kane's kicking in the NFL.
Yeah, I've got one actually, and I know this because I watched a mini documentary on him, and I know he used to actually his first sport was football, and I think he played a semi-professional level in Ukraine. Alexander Usyk, now unified heavyweight champion of the world. He strikes me as a mean as fuck right back. Do you know what I mean? or just an absolute if you're a winger, you see obviously he's not gonna be as stocky as he is now, obviously, but he looks terrifying. He's just got a face of just oh god. I mean,
what you do is you put him in that Gattuso role next to Pirlo.
Yes, yeah. He's a midfield
just
destroyer.
Have him running around, absolutely mullering people.
Yeah, I think Alexander Usyk could. But when you find a Serbian regen, I know he's not from Serbia, but when you find a Serbian regen on FM, he's 20 aggression. You think he's 6'4" and he's a mean bastard. Yeah. That's what Alexander Usyk would be. And you know what? I genuinely believe this. He feels like he'd be a West Ham player. Do you know what I mean? He's a bit of a maverick. He's a bit of a lunatic. I just think there's something not quite. It's not all there up there. Because how could you be if you want to be a boxer? Quite frankly, I think he'd be he's got West Ham right back written all over him, and I'm here for it because Aaron Wan-Bissaka's been questionable at best recently. So get him over. Get him over for a game or two.
Get him a trial. Exactly. That's a good point, actually.
Sorry to say, I'm pretty sure because we had Andrei Yarmolenko for a few years. I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture of him holding a West Ham shirt. So we're halfway there.
Yeah.
He's got a shirt. He's got some contacts.
Make it happen
for a trial.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
It's a good point actually with the old the boxers and fighters as well, because they have insane cardio. So maybe that'd be someone similar. But I think same with any sport, right? I think European and South American people, you play football from the age of 5, and a lot of other sports are what these other people have been playing since the age of 5 instead of football. So it'd be really hard for anyone to just kind of pick it up. And we saw that with Usain Bolt, right? He was so
Yeah.
convinced he was going to be the next big thing in football, and he couldn't get a contract for the Central Coast Mariners or whatever it was. Like,
No.
even though it's like they know it's like this is going to be incredible marketing. It's like, have you seen him kick a football? He's somehow the worst player on the pitch for Live Aid or whatever, Football Aid.
Yeah, that Ollie Murs on the pitch, which is concerning.
Boris Johnson.
I'm now, yeah. Oh God, yeah. Oh, that's one. Yeah, just going around rugby tackling people. The only other one I'm thinking of is now saying on boxers. I can now also just picture Tyson Fury as like a League Two centre back, just shouting Dosser at people. You know what I mean? Like,
nah, target forward, mate. Stick him up top.
yeah. Give me a target. Yeah, just imagine having Tyson Fury mark you from a corner. It'd be horrendous. It's like, yeah, bomb.
Ref, he's been saying some really questionable stuff to me.
Yeah. Big John Fury on the touchline. Oh, that's a universe. Do I want to see that?
I can see John Fury in the dugout next to Sam Allardyce.
Oh yeah, like his next Sammy Lee or something.
Yeah,
that could be, that's a duo. Yeah, right. If Everton get rid of Dyche, again, make it happen.
Yeah.
On the Big Sam Tyson Fury combo.
Sounds perfect. I'd be well up for that. Well, I did go off on a tangent. Cheers, Jord. That was really good, actually. That was really, really fun. We'll try and make a regular thing of this in the international break, seeing as they seem to be happening every 4 to 6 days.
Yeah,
we'll put the feelers out for the next episode next time. But always, if you want to get involved, you can get in touch with us on Twitter. You can get me and Breezy through Discord. You can email us. If I can remember the email, I'm sure you can Google it or something. It'll be around there somewhere. But that was really good fun. And thank you for everyone who's got involved, everyone who's put a question forward. And yeah, like I say, we'll have more of the same next time when no one can be asked watching England play insert random country who's rated 45th in the world.
Maybe next time we do like a San Marino dedicated podcast. They won 3-1 tonight. That's their first away competitive win ever. They beat Liechtenstein 3-1.
They'd only won one game in their history until about 3 months ago, hadn't they? And now they've won 2.
Yeah, both against Liechtenstein. So
they're in better form than United at the minute. I might start watching them. Guys, as always,
San Marino.
Yeah, the San Marino, whatever their nickname is. I'll get a San Marino shirt for the next one. Guys, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Whatever you're watching or listening on, make sure you give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share, whatever you can do. Leave a comment down below because it does help engagement. Let's start doing that, shall we? And we'll see you all next time. Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.